I'll never forget when I logged into AOL and I saw on the WWF website, WWF purchases WCW. And I ran into the room where my dad was with his friend Dave, and I said, "Dad, this is the biggest thing to happen in professional wrestling history." And he stared at me. And I stared at him. And he looked at me directly in the eyes and he said, "Who gives a f?" Before the internet, we relied on a little thing called physical media. There's something lost with not consuming as much physical media. That feeling when you go into a store and you pick up the movie or video game you want and you look at the cover, sometimes not knowing anything about it, flipping it to the back and reading the brief synopsis to decide whether or not you were going to invest $3 to $5 just to rent it. You couldn't just get everything into your phone with the push of a button or go on the computer and get it with the click of a mouse. Today, if a wrestling story breaks, you can just go online and you have the information within seconds. But with wrestling magazines, physical media, you had to wait 2 or 3 months. 3 months! It's for the latest and greatest results, insight, scoops, stories, profiles. I still own a lot of physical media, especially wrestling magazines. About a year ago, longtime wrestling fan and a good friend of mine, Mark Ryland, was getting rid of a plethora of classic wrestling magazines, and he reached out to me because he knows I'm somewhat of a wrestling hoarder. Because of the generosity of Mark, I now have access to hundreds and hundreds of archived wrestling magazines, and I could think of nothing greater to do with them than to share some of the stories with all of you from the pages of a wrestling magazine.
Rankings and rumors, who's top of the list? Dream match scenarios you don't want to miss. Spotlights on legends, the moves they've perfected. Behind the scenes scoops that you never expected. From the pages of a wrestling magazine, profiles, predictions, and champions supreme. Breaking news and the wildest scenes. It all comes alive in a wrestling magazine.
Hi, I'm your host, Gregory Iron, professional wrestler with cerebral palsy, motivational speaker, and the host of the Iron on Wrestling podcast, which you can listen to on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you download podcasts. You can even subscribe to this channel that you're watching right now and get all the full episodes. Through acquiring wrestling magazines as a child, I learned so much about the industry that I had no clue about. Initially, I was exposed to the WWF, but through the magazines, sometimes I would learn about an up-and-coming star with a profile that wrestled for the independent wrestling scene. If a major star that wrestled for the WWF disappeared from television, I might discover that they were wrestling in another company.
WCW.
And when I was growing up, there were so many magazines to choose from. Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, Wrestling Eye, WWF Magazine, WCW Magazine, ECW Magazine, and of course, the magazine that stood atop all the others, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. The first 2 wrestling magazines I ever acquired were the February 1993 and July 1993 issues of PWI, respectively. Initially, I wanted to start with February, but as it turns out, Hulk Hogan has been a hot topic of discussion, to say the least. Don't jerk us around, Hulk. Are you back or not? If you collected wrestling magazines, do you remember the first magazine you ever got? Is there a favorite article or column from that magazine? Let us know in the comments below. Maybe we'll cover it on this show. With waiting 3 months, it would be because of a magazine like Pro Wrestling Illustrated that I would find out that Kerry Von Erich and Dino Bravo passed away. Can you imagine finding out that one of your favorite, or in the case of Dino Bravo, least favorite wrestlers, died 3 months after the fact. The cover story. Reading this article for the first time in many years, it was crazy how much 1993 articles got right about Hulk Hogan, and it could easily apply to 2025. A reporter who has dealt with Hulk Hogan on countless occasions over the past 13 years recently summed up the Hulkster's character, quote, basically he's a good man, but he can also be a bit of a user. He'll tell the fans they're his best friends, but then he'll turn his back on them. There's never been a wrestler more popular than Hogan, but on the other hand, there's never been a wrestler who's known how to use his fans better than Hogan.
I've had all kind of tag team partners over the years, but you, the fans, have been my greatest tag team partner because you guys have stuck with me through thick and thin, dudes.
Being a fan of Hulk Hogan is something that I've been struggling with for the last few years. On one hand, I grew up as a kid who believed in the 4 commandments, training, saying my prayers, taking my vitamins, and believing in myself. But on the other, as an adult man, every single time Hulk Hogan talks, or Terry Bollea talks, or whoever wants to be in that moment, you can't believe a word he says. He talks out both sides of his mouth. It's hard to emotionally invest in this individual. Also, if you just saw the meme going around of Hogan coming out and the caption on the screen for the subtitle saying crowd booing, you really need to watch it for yourself because the unintentional comedic timing. Person typing was like crowd, and they're listening as Hogan's standing there and they go, oh no, is he not getting cheered? Okay, I'm gonna booing. Like I was crying laughing at the absurdity of it all. To continue the article, the crazy thing about it is Hogan doesn't even realize what he's doing. Doesn't he?
I don't drink alcohol at all.
When did you give up alcohol?
No, about 6 months ago. Completely. I caught myself with the alcohol and I just decided to stop it. Oh, that's some darn good beer.
The reason they're questioning whether or not Hulk Hogan is back is Hogan after the world title or is an Oscar on his mind? I sense a little bit of sarcasm there.
Right ones are the best ones?
Well, of course they are.
Wow, I found a good one.
The article ends by saying, the wrestlers resent his return. It's bad enough that Hogan can set his own agenda. What's worse is Hogan is allowed to take over. Wrestling in a major match at WrestleMania is a major goal for every wrestler, but when Hogan just shows up 2 months before the biggest card of the year, he takes a spot that another wrestler has been working all year for.
I'm back, little dude. I am no pervert.
Hart versus Yokozuna lost a lot of its luster when Hogan and Beefcake versus Money Inc. was announced. All of a sudden, the world title match became secondary. This went to print a little bit too soon because whoever said that quote, they probably didn't like the way WrestleMania 9 ended up turning out.
I'm issuing the challenge to either you or the Jack brother.
On the bright side, it did become priority on the show because they had 2 championship matches on a WrestleMania for the first time ever. So that's a good thing.
Look at the $100 bills falling out of this pocket.
One of my favorite things to check out was always the scouting report in Pro Wrestling Illustrated, an examination of the relative strengths and weaknesses of wrestling's top stars. There will be no punches pulled as sports athletes undergo the harshest scrutiny anywhere in the wrestling world. To follow up on the Hulk Hogan cover story, they did do a scouting report on Hulk Hogan. Height 6'8", weight 285, down from his previous weight of 303. Years as pro 14. Strengths rejuvenated. Time away from the ring has helped him. Quicker. Has lost extra bulk and appears more streamlined. 1993. Gee, I wonder why he appears more streamlined at this point. Did something happen prior? What could it be?
I'm not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids.
His weaknesses are as follows. Predictable arsenal. Still has not added anything new to his repertoire. Hey, listen, I know he had a predictable arsenal, maybe every now and then in America, he needed to bust out that enziguri that he would do in Japan. You ever see that before? You ever see Hulk Hogan do an enziguri? Did you ever think that was possible? It's crazy. Like, it's not even great, but just the fact that it's Hulk Hogan doing it is a miracle. Also like to point out there's a scouting report on Giant Gonzalez, which says that one of his strengths is athleticism. Athleticism. We're talking about the same Giant Gonzalez, right? They wrestled Undertaker at WrestleMania 9 and SummerSlam 93. That Giant Gonzalez. Athleticism. His weaknesses are that he's rigid. No shit. Arn Anderson also has a scouting report on here where I laughed out loud at the fact that in his scouting report, his weakness is poor eyesight. Can't wear his glasses during battle. Were they just like stretching for a weakness here? I don't know if him ever wearing glasses in a match was a consideration. They never did like an angle where he's like, my vision's bad. That's by Arn Anderson. My vision's bad. Contacts were a thing in 1993, right? I mean, the advertisements in wrestling magazines are some of my favorite things too. Like, for example, Skull Crusher's Wrestling School. It says, want to be a wrestler? Has the phone number listed. And then the teachers were Exotic Adrian and Miss Linda. Yes, Exotic Adrian Street was the trainer at this school in Gulf Breeze, Florida. However, you think like, okay, like, well, how much is it to train at the Skull Crushers Wrestling School? Well, that's not listed. The following items are available for purchase if you want to be a wrestler. Wrestling masks, spandex tights, spandex trunks, spandex leotards. You could also buy a Skull Crusher t-shirt or tank top or sweatshirt or a wrestling video. So I guess when they ask want to be a wrestler, it's like, do you want to pretend in the comfort of your own home that you are in fact a wrestler? Off the Top Rope was always a fun article. Basically, the writer of said article, in this case would be a guy by the name of Eddie, would play like a heel persona, and he would just insult the fan who submitted a letter. My favorite letter submitted in this issue of PWI was the following, because I feel like, based on my experiences in locker rooms and around wrestlers over the last 18 years, that this was definitely, there was a lot of realism what was written here. Dear Eddie, I am of the opinion that Curt Hennig is the best wrestler in the world. His perfect plex is the best finishing maneuver in the business. What is your opinion? Justin Pagana, Lynn, Massachusetts. The response, Dear Justin, it was nearly 10 years ago that I traveled to your sleepy hometown of Lynn with Bill Apter for my first ever road trip. Back then I was still in awe of Bronco Bill. I remember how embarrassed I was when we arrived in our hotel room and I realized the stench following us from the airport did not come from the nearby garbage dump, but from the man whose twin bed was but 3 feet from mine. That night, Kerry Von Erich treated reporters to a wild, rambling discourse on wrestling, responsibility, and Christianity. Jake Roberts shared that his loneliness on the road might be reduced by a pet. He was still considering what kind. Later, we sat peacefully at a Chinese restaurant and watched 465-pound one-man gang actually say to a small waiter, I'll take one of everything. Memories of Lynn. Curt Hennig, he wasn't there. Acquiring physical media wasn't just about listening to the music that you purchased or watching the movie that you rented or reading the magazine. It was about collecting something. It was about having something that you could show your kids or your grandchildren, your friends, your relatives. It was about having something you loved to leave behind for someone else to find. The way we're going, the only thing that we're going to have to leave behind is our cell phones. And trust me when I tell you, if you're anything like me, 90% of your stuff in your cell phone, you're not going to want anybody to discover. I promise you. Bring back physical media. And if not, keep coming back to this YouTube channel to check out these wrestling magazines. Want to get a closer look into this Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine? Subscribe to patreon.com/irononwrestling, where we'll be showing you the entire magazine and we'll do a deeper dive in an Iron on Wrestling audio podcast. So, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the YouTube channel right now. Check out patreon.com/ironwrestling. Make sure you follow me on social media, and you can book me for anything on there. Pro wrestling, motivational speaking, pro wrestling seminars. Until next time, kiss goodbye.